Hi, I'm Matt Munzell. I'm one of the instructors here at Western Global. I'm going to be showing you the pre-flight or the interior safety inspection on the MD-11. Now I'm going to pick it up from putting hands on the airplane. In other words, the emergency equipment check, the logbook, the circuit breakers, those things are already done. So we're going to come into the cockpit, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check to make sure that the radar is off, because we don't want to put power on the airplane if we're going to radiate somebody. And you can see in this case it's on because the switch is in one direction of the head. So we'll put that in the center, so that's off. We're going to check to make sure our fuel switches are off. They are. And if we're chalked, which we just did our exterior safety, so we should know that the airplane is chalked, we can release the brakes, and I'll do that as soon as I sit down here. The next thing we're checking is the spoiler handle, make sure that it's retracted. The flap handle should agree with the position of the flaps that we noted outside when we did our walk around. Checking to make sure the gear handle's down. On the overhead panel, we want to check and make sure that the emergency fuel dump stop, the fuel dump switch, and the manifold drain are all covered and safety. Moving up to the emergency power switch, we're checking to make sure the emergency power switch is in the off position. And then finally, we're ready to start the airplane. Okay, I've now had a seat here in the airplane. I'm sitting at the FO station. I'm going to go ahead and release the brakes by pressing on the toe brakes while holding the handle, and then just allow it to slide forward. Now the brakes are released. And we're now ready to fire up the airplane. So we move up to the overhead panel, and we're looking for the battery switch, which is right here. And we're going to turn the battery switch on. Okay, get all the 10 bus off lights. And now we're looking to see if we have external power available. And the way we know that is by seeing that the available light is showing here in the external power switch. If it wasn't, that would mean we'd have to start the APU before we had power. And I want to show you that that procedure here just momentarily so that you'll know what to look for. So let's assume we don't have external power for the moment. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is do the APU fire test. Do that by pressing the engine APU fire test on the overhead panel. When I do that, I should have 7 lights, 3 in each fire handle. I'm sorry, 1 in each fire handle for a total of 3 on the engines. 1 in the APU fire handle, and then we should also have 3 lights in each one of the fuel switches down here on the pedestal, which we do. Okay, and notice we're not getting any sounds. None of the screens are on, so we're not seeing any visual or oral warnings other than these fire lights. Okay, so that's a good test, and that's what we're looking for with just the battery engine APU fire test. So I'm going to release, and at this point we would go ahead and start the APU by pressing the APU power switch. Okay, by pressing the APU power switch instead of the APU start stop switch, which is here, we get a couple advantages. The first advantage is that as soon as the APU power is available, it'll automatically come online, whereas if we start it with the APU start stop switch, that won't happen. We'll have to actually add it by pressing the APU power switch again. So advantages are starting with the APU power, it automatically comes online once it's available. And it also automatically shuts down after engine starts when the electrical power is no longer being used after a 90-second cool down from being if we used air for the engine start. Okay, you'll notice that the APU takes a very long time to start. It can take anywhere from 45 to 60 seconds to be up and online. So don't think when you're looking at it that it's abnormal that it's taking so long. That's just pretty common. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and push the APU external switch so we can get power so I can continue, just make the video a little bit shorter. But it would take a little while. It will come on automatically without intervention. But we'll go ahead and turn the external power on here.
Autopilot.
As soon as we do that, the rest of the AC buses are powered. All the power for the rest of the airplane comes back online. And now I'm going to go down here and notice all my screens are still dark. That's because we usually turn the screens off when we leave the airplane to keep from burning them up here. So to turn those on, just below the fuel switches are these little knobs. These control the brightness intensity for the screens, which is going to turn them all the way to the right. And that's going to turn the screens on for us. And there we go. Okay. Now once we get all the screens on, we're going to do another fire test because we weren't able to get all the alerts with the fire test the way that we should with just having the battery. So let's go ahead and do another engine and APU fire test so that we get all of our alerts. So we've got the tritone, the oral warning. We've got all the fire handle indications that we had before down in the pedestal. We also have the alerts on the EAD, engine 1 fire, engine 2 fire, engine 3 fire, and APU fire. Alright, now the final thing that we want to do here, we also have both master warning. We want to cancel this warning with the master warning to make sure that we can get rid of it so that it's not annoying us and distracting us in flight if we have it. So I'm going to push it here with my free finger. So I just pressed that master warning flashing light, and it canceled the warning, or canceled the oral warning, and that's a successful test. Okay, we can release the switch, and we can move on with the next pre-flight item. All right, now you notice here, I turned the external power on so we could continue the pre-flight, but the APU power automatically came on. Notice that the on light for the APU power and the on light for the external power are both lit. Okay, that doesn't mean they're both powering the bus. If I go to my electrical synoptic page, which is, these are called Q switches, by the way. If I go to my electrical systems display here, you can see that the external power is connected and it's available, and it's powering this tie bus. Okay, and the tie bus it has no buses on it at the moment, because if you look here, these AC ties are open. Okay, and you can see here at the bottom that the APU power is providing power to all the AC buses. So they're both on, so if the APU power is to kick off for some reason or flame out, the AC ties would close. Each one of these little AC ties would close, and external power would pick up the power for the AC buses. So it's kind of just standing by. But we don't really need it right now, so I usually teach that once we have the APU up and online, I'll go ahead and disconnect it by pressing the off button. We never want to have it ground disconnect with the on button lit, because you could hurt somebody. Okay, so turn it off and then call the ground and have them disconnect the external power. That'll also prevent you from forgetting to do it later on and trying to push back with the external power card connected. Okay. All right, so the APU started. The next step in our pre-flight procedure is to check and make sure that the trim air light is dark. It should be, and it is. Okay. Then we're going to move down here to our annunciator light test, which is here. This function of this switch tests a couple of things. It tests one, all the lights and all the switches. It also tests the air system. So when you push this button, you're going to push it long enough that you can check every light and every switch to make sure that they're all working. And then you're also going to check before you release it to make sure that on this engine and alert display, EAD down here, that you have a air system test message. We don't want to release it until we get that, okay? So let's go ahead and let's perform that test. So we start on the far left corner. We go down and we check every light and every switch. Again, every light, every switch, making sure that none of them are burned out. Some of them have two positions on the switch. Make sure that both of them are showing. Every light, every switch, all the way down the panel. Notice there's a couple that don't test. The maintenance interphone here right under my knuckle, that one doesn't test, so you can turn it on to check it. Okay. Also, on the lower pedestal down here, sorry, that cord's in the way. Notice the ident doesn't test either, so you can push those on as well on both sides. I've got this one on over here, but that one's not, so I would push that on before I let go. And I'm checking every light, every switch. You can look at the screens to make sure that there's nothing missing. All right, and then if you look on the EAD here, see the air system test message? That's what we're looking for, so now I can release. All right. And now it's going to go through its test, and it'll tell us if it fails the test, so we don't have to watch and make sure that it does it. But you can see on the overhead panel, it's going through and checking the continuity for the manifolds to make sure that they're functioning properly. Sometimes you'll get a little oral alert as well as doing that as well. All right, moving on from the annunciator light test, we come across and we want to turn the APU air on, right? We want to get some air because it's hot here in Los Angeles. So APU air is on. The next step is to come up and turn on our IRUs. Now the first IRU that I turn on is going to automatically test that cargo fire system for me. And it's the first of any of these IRUs. It doesn't matter what sequence you turn them on. The first one turned on should test the IRU, the cargo fire test. If it didn't, at that point we would go ahead and press that manual test and hold it until we had the cargo fire test on the EAD. So I'm going to go ahead and turn them on. We got 4 red, 4 low, 2 disags to test, and a cabin air comes on, smoke light comes on in the cabin air switch. Okay, that's a successful test. Now this is the FO setup here that I'm showing you. So right after you do that, you're going to discontinue what you would be your normal flow and doing pre-flight, and you're going to come down here to the FMS. Okay, and we're going to set this FMS, or initialize this FMS, and get it ready to go. So the first thing we're going to do is turn the brightness up on it. So just turn this little knob here to the right, and you'll see the brightness come on. And we want to do the same thing to the captains. Okay. Now the first page that we want to start on for initialization of the FMS is the aircraft status page, and you can see over here that the captain already has the FMS status page up, but I need to bring it up over here. Generally 9 times out of 10 when the airplane's powered up and it looks like this, you can just press the FMC2 switch, lateral revision, and it'll go to the aircraft status page. Now don't worry if that doesn't happen. It may go to something like this. If that's the case, you can still get to the aircraft status page by selecting reference, aircraft status. Okay, and that'll still get us to the same page. So we're still accomplishing the same goal here. All right, now the goal of checking this aircraft status page is to make sure that all the information on the first officers and the captains are identical. Okay, so as we look at these two together, we'll start in the top left corner, and the first thing I want to look at is the model, right? That's MD-11. So that's correct, it matches the other side. The next statement is deflected ailerons, def AIL. If you see that def AIL, it means that the airplane's equipped with deflected ailerons. And your instructors will explain a little bit more about what the deflected ailerons are. But just know right now that we're checking to make sure that both sides either have it or both sides don't. They should match. Okay, so if we didn't have, this indication is that we do have deflected ailerons. If it says def AIL, that means we do have them. If it didn't say anything, if it was just blank here, that would indicate that that we didn't have deflected ailerons, that we would need to use the proper performance information. Okay. The next thing to come over and check is the engine type, CF680C2, CF80C62, and then the ops program or the software. This box has a what they call a 913 load on it, and that checks with what's on the captain's side. You may see some other numbers. 921 is another one that you could see, but just make sure that they match. Okay. The next thing that you see is the active database. So the airplane can carry two databases, so the current one and then the next database, or you could have an expired database. In this case, for today, we have our active database, but I want to show you what to do if you came across one of these and you needed to swap databases, because maybe you had the expired one and the active one was in the secondary. To switch the database, all you have to do is lateral revise. We call these laterals, by the way. I didn't mention that. These are lateral revisions, and these are vertical revisions. Okay, so I'm going to lateral revision the secondary database just by selecting it. That brings up a confirm prompt over on the vertical side. I'm going to go ahead and confirm it, and you can see here that it swapped the database. All right, and to swap it back, I would do the same thing here because this is the most current. That's the one I want. Confirm it, and it switches it back. Now, something important to note about this, if you don't catch this in your pre-flight, which you should every time, this is the first page you should go through, but let's say maybe you forgot one day and you went ahead and entered your entire flight plan, and you realized it later that you needed to swap the database. Well, guess what? You're going to lose your entire flight plan. So this is why it would behoove you to check this first, okay, because it's going to wipe out everything that you just put in as soon as you swap those databases. Okay, coming down to the bottom left corner. This performance factor is a performance number based on engineering, has to do with how efficient the airplane is, so forth and so on. If you had any performance corrections, you could put them in here, but usually this is 0. Okay, and then the airplane's going to lead us to the next page. It tells you, hey, I think the next page is flight plan init, and so that's where we're going to go. Flight plan init, select it. Now, as the first officer, the only thing you're going to do here, or as the non-flying pilot, is just set up the from to alternate. Check the points, the latitude and longitude, and we're going to go ahead and initialize the IRS. IRS initialization takes approximately 10 minutes, but I'll show you that here in a second. So let's go ahead and enter our to and from. We're going to go from Los Angeles to Atlanta today, so KLAX / because we have to keep it up exactly how it looks at the top here, from / to. So we're going to enter it the same format. Los Angeles to, where did I say we're going? Atlanta, ATL. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and, we call vertical revise R1. Okay, airplane took it. I can go back to the init page. The alternate's going to be, give me 1 second, let me look it up here, Birmingham. So we're going to put in Birmingham. And Birmingham, there we go. Did I do that right? No, I think I put that in wrong. Hang on, let me check it. No, that was right, BHM. Okay, go ahead and put that on the alternate vertical revise. Back to flight plan init. All right, now what we want to do is check our position. We would do this by referring to the Jeppesen charts, which I didn't bring down here with me for some strange reason. But your instructor will show you how to do that. You'll go ahead and check the position to make sure that the position, the latitude and the longitude matched. Okay. If they didn't match, let's say that our position today wasn't 33.56.7, it was 33.56.8 or 33.56.9. All we have to do is make sure that the arrows are above the one that we want to change. For instance, either latitude or longitude, and I can move those arrows back and forth by selecting next to the one I want. See it move the arrows over? If I select it again, it moves the arrows back over. Once I have it on the side I want, let's say if I want to change this to 8, all I have to use is these up and down arrows. So I'm going to go ahead and select 8, okay? And let's say I was 118, 24, 5 instead of 6. So I'll select this side, and I'll change that to a 5. All right, once I'm satisfied with that my position is correct and accurate, I would check it or double check it with my buddy, my captain, make sure he agreed with the position, and then go ahead and select the initialize IRS. Now remember, I told you that this process takes approximately 10 minutes from the time we turn the IRUs on. So if we look up here at the overhead panel, you can see that they still haven't aligned. They're still, the lights are still showing nav off amber, okay? We can go down to our FMS here and find out how much time is remaining before they'll be aligned by going to reference, position reference, and then selecting the page key over to page 2, and you can see that there's 3 minutes remaining on the IRU alignment. Okay, so that's how you would do that. All right, so once you're finished with the initialization, you can continue with your pre-flight setup, which is what we're going to do now. So we come back up to the overhead panel, and we're going to go ahead and first test the flight deck recorder. Now these are a couple different versions on the airplanes we have. The one in the same here, when you press the test button, the line goes all the way to the right and just sits there. You could put your headset in, listen for the tones and the channels. There's the sweep. Okay, that's a successful test. The galley bus switches is a passenger airplane thing. Not going to have these on the freighters, but these generator resets should be dark. Okay, if they're not, contact maintenance. All right, you're going to be looking for the cargo temp controller to be in the high position, and then the aft at 12 o'clock. Ignition is off. We come up to the hydraulic system control, and we're going to check with maintenance before we do this, because remember, if any of the controls out there are not in the position that one of the flight controls are in, when we press this and pressurize the hydraulics, they're going to move, and we don't want to hurt somebody. So we definitely want to clear the flight controls and make sure everybody's clear downstairs. Additionally, if you have missed your your GACFM check and you didn't check to make sure that those door handles were in the parallel position and the doors were up, for instance, if the doors are down and the handles are in the up position, as soon as I press this, they're going to come closed and we could hurt somebody. So again, this is really important to check before pressing the switch. Okay, so I've checked with maintenance. They said it's clear outside, so I'm going to go ahead and test. So we uncover the switch, press the test. The test comes on. If I go to the hydraulic page on the synoptic here, I can see that the hydraulic pressure system test is being completed here, and we don't have to watch it. It will tell us if it fails. So it's not necessary to watch the entire test. So coming back up here to the overhead panel, I also want to make sure my system switches are in auto, which they are. Auto. The smoke electric air and isolation switch should be in the normal position. The cabin bus and generator switch disconnects should all be guarded in safety. And I'm going to come over here to my emergency power switch, and I'm going to turn this to arm. Before I do that, I need to look down at the EAD down here to make sure that I don't have a battery charging. If I had a battery charging and I selected the switch to arm, it would fail the test. Okay, so we're going to move it to arm. The on light will illuminate for approximately 30 seconds while it's doing its test, and then it should go out. Okay, and again, I don't have to watch it. It will tell me if something doesn't go right with the test. All right, moving down to the air panel. We just want to make sure these are set for whatever comfort level you're looking for. You can set these by going to the air panel on the Q switch here. Sorry. That's the one lit up here. If I go to the air panel, looking at the air panel here, you can see the The white numbers here inside the cockpit, that's the actual. The little cyan colored number is your set temperature. And then the temperature at the very top is your duct temperature. That's the temperature of the air coming out of the duct. Okay, and that applies to each one of the sections. Whoops, sorry about that. That applies to each one of the different sections, okay? So we're just going to set them to a comfortable temperature. Depending on where you're at, that may mean warm, it may mean cold, depends on if it's hot or cold outside. I'm just going to leave them at the 12 o'clock position right now. As I come to the system control panel, I notice that the system is in manual, but I don't have anything on my flight plan saying that it should be. So I'm going to return it to auto after I check with maintenance to make sure they're not working on it or anything like that. Okay, so that system switches in manual. These are covered in safety, and the APU air is on and providing air for us. Coming down to the fuel system, there's not a lot to do on this one. We're just going to make sure that the system switches in auto, and you can even look at the tank values to make sure you don't have any X's or missing numbers on the panel. That can happen, so just take a look, make sure they're all there, and they are. Okay, moving down to the light panel, we can control our interior lighting with these switches here by turning them. These are really two switches. There's this one, not switches, but I forget what you call these, rotary dials or whatever. I can turn this one to the right. That's the backlighting, and then the outer one, this black knob here, is for the flood. Okay, so that gives me flood lighting. Same thing with this one. This is for the pedestal backlighting, which you can't really see right now because, well, you can see it a little bit there. I turned it up. You saw the lights come on behind the pedestal and the keys. And then this one here, the outer one, is for this floodlight that's going to shine down on the pedestal, lighting it up down here. Okay, so set those to your desired levels, and then we'll move on. This is your emergency light test. So we're going to take this, or these are your emergency lights rather. We're going to put them in arm, okay, and then we're going to press and hold that test button for about 8 to 10 seconds. What we're looking for is on the EAD to get an emergency light test pass, which you can see just came up down there in the center of the EAD. So I can release it, come back up here to my overhead. I'm going to go ahead and turn my seatbelt and no smoking signs to on. The standby compass light, you can turn that on. Make sure that the landing lights and nose wheel light are off. And this is the proper indication for this panel. You want to have 3 dark, 3 lit, right? So you wouldn't want to see that, right? Because that means the nav lights are off, right? And we also wouldn't want to see this at the gate, which means that the wing turn-off lights are on. Okay, so we want 3 dark, 3 lit. Okay, we don't need that anymore. So that's the setup for the light panel. All right, we're back up here to the, we did the APU fire test, there's nothing to do there. Oh, I'm sorry, the terrain. So this is your terrain test, and before we can test this, we need to be aligned. So our IRUs have to be aligned because they use the position information. Okay, so let's look over at our IRUs, and we can see because these nav lights are off that they are aligned. Okay, we can also check on our PFD, this taxi word means that it's also aligned. Okay, so we are aligned. Now before we test the terrain, we need to make sure that both of our screens are showing terrain. And when I say that, I mean this word terrain needs to be showing on both screens. And you can even see a little bit of terrain showing here, also on the captain's side. Now, the reason I say that is because there's 2 ways you can view this information. It's either terrain or it's going to be weather. And you can control that with this little switch here on the glare shield. It says WX bright push on off. So the switch is a pushable switch. If I push it, now I'm displaying weather. If I push it again, and now I'm displaying terrain. Okay. In addition to being a push switch, it also can turn. So if I turn it all the way to the left, I turn the brightness on my terrain all the way down. So I'll see all my nav data and everything like that, but I won't be able to see any of the terrain because remember there was some terrain showing over here. And just watch as I turn the brightness level back up. You'll see it come back up. Do you see that over here on the right? Okay, so you want to make sure that your terrain, that you're in terrain and it's full bright before doing this test on both screens. The captain has one over here for his screen. Same thing, works the same way. So once we're satisfied that we have terrain on both screens, we're going to go to the overhead panel and the terrain switch, which is here. We're going to hold it only momentarily. If you hold it too long, you'll wind up having to listen to the entire test, which just isn't necessary. So really what you want to do is push and hold for approximately 2 seconds and release. So watch me. 1 1000, 2 1000, release. Now I'm going to go down to my screen here, and I'm looking for the little, I guess you call it like a magic carpet. Okay, so you see that's a proper indication. You should have that on both sides. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. All right, that with the oral warnings is a successful test of the terrain system. Okay, and that will eventually go away. There it goes. All right, now coming back here to the overhead panel, we want to make sure that these switches, the flap limit and the elevator fill, are both in the auto position. One thing about the elevator fill is it can be deceivingly look like an auto because you have to pull it out to make it actually work, but you'll notice that when you pull it out, the manual light comes on, so that's not auto. Even though it's lined up with auto, it's in manual. You have to push that in to get it back to auto. This one's not like that. This one's just a turn left and turn right. It doesn't pull out at all. Only the elevator fill. Okay, so in, on auto. These should be dark. Okay. All right, and that's really all we're going to do with that panel. Moving down to the cabin pressurization panel, we're checking to make sure that the outflow valve is open, which is indicated here by the OP position. Also, if I went to the air page, I also have the valve position showing full open. Okay. So we also want to make sure that the system select switch is in auto, which it is, because if it wasn't, it would say manual, just like that. So we're in auto. Ditching switch is guarded and safety. Coming down here, the anti-ice, we want to go ahead and turn the defog on. So press it on. And then we're finally going to do the fuel used reset. All right, so we're going to go to the fuel page. So go back down here to your Q switches and select the fuel page. And the fuel used will be displayed here in each one of these little engine symbols. Okay, so right now they've already been reset because we just powered up the airplane, but if it wasn't, you would see a value and you would just go ahead and push and hold the fuel used reset in until you see the 0 values in the engines, and that's how you reset it. And that's it for the overhead panel. And I'm going to move down to the glare shield panel now. All right, on the glare shield panel, we want to make sure that we have a couple of things set. First off, we want to go ahead and be sure that we're in RA for takeoff. So you can see this little indicator here, the little white mark. When I move that, like that's RA. If I move it back to the right, that's baro. So we want to keep that in RA. We want to make sure that our barometer is showing for Q and H. The other option would be QFE, but we want to be in Q and H. Okay, Q and H, we're in, down here we can check 2992. That's what we want. You can either also change from inches to hectopascals. So there will be 1013, but here in LA we want 2992 inches of mercury. Okay. All right, so back here, we always fly the airplane in traffic and data modes. So what I mean is this little square right here shows what modes we have being displayed on the nav screen. Right now it's not showing anything. So I'm going to go ahead and select traffic and data, and you'll see that it shows up here in the square that now all the traffic and data is being displayed on the screen. Okay. We also always fly with VOR1 and VOR2. But before we turn those on, we want to check and make sure that our NDBs are working. So we're going to select NDB1 and NDB2. And they pop up here on the bottom with no amber X's, which indicate that they are working, they're functioning. And then I'm going to go ahead and just select VOR1 and VOR2, just like that. So that's the way we want our nav screen. We want a traffic data, VOR1, VOR2. Okay, coming back here to the glare shield panel. Just going across the top, you just want to make sure that your vertical speed is actually showing VES, because it could show FPA. Okay, we want vertical speed. All right, feet. We don't want meters, right? I could show meters as well. We want feet. Heading. I want to make sure I have heading, not track. So I want heading, and then I want IAS, not Mach, but IAS. Okay. I want to make sure my auto selector is in auto. This is the bank limiter for the heading and turning. You can see it works the same way. It has that little white mark. When it's in auto, straight up and down here. And that's what we want. We want it in auto. The AFS override switches are up. If they were down, they look like that. We want them up. Okay, just like that. All right, and you always leave 10,000 in here until we get our clearance. That's how we know we haven't got our clearance yet. Okay, so that's pretty much it here for the glare shield panel. Now I'm going to move down here to my oxygen test. To do my oxygen test, I'll try to move the microphone closer to make sure you can hear me. To do the oxygen test, the first thing you want to do is observe the bottle quantity. The bottle quantity here, I don't know if you can see how well you can see this, but the outer scale is your quantity, your bottle quantity. Your inner scale is your line pressure. in order to see your line pressure, you have to pull this switch down. It's a spring-loaded switch. And when I pull it down, I can read on the inner scale whatever my my line pressure is. When it's up, it shows bottle quantity on the outer scale. When I pull it down, it shows line pressure on the inner scale. Okay, this is important because we want to check and make sure that we have good line pressure before and after the oxygen test, because if not, it could mean that the oxygen bottles have been turned off, right? So if somebody just went down and turned the bottles off, well, they might still be line pressure until you did your oxygen test, and as soon as you did your oxygen test, that needle would drop down to 0 because you would have bled all the pressure out of the line. Okay, so we definitely want to check this before and after we do our oxygen test. Okay. All right, and some airplanes will have 2 bottles, so you may have 3 positions. It may be quantity on the top, and in the middle, and then finally line pressure at the bottom. But it works the same way. All right, doing our oxygen test, first thing we want to do is make sure that we have our radio set up here. So I'm going to select interphone here. Excuse me, interphone, and I want to make sure that my radio knob here is up so I can hear, and I'm going to turn it to a value that's reasonable so that I can hear. I'm also going to tell my buddy or my captain, if he's sitting over there, which he's not today, but if he was, I would tell him, hey, I'm getting ready to do an oxygen test, watch your ears, because this could be really loud, and if he's got a headset on, you could blow out his eardrums, so we don't want that, because that would be bad. Okay, and I'm also going to turn my speaker above my head up to a normal, reasonable value, and also on his side, I would turn the speaker volume up to a reasonable level, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the test. Now, this will be interesting because I can't hold the phone and do the test at the same time. I'm going to try to. You have to hold up either this interphone switch here. You can push it up to the interphone. It's a spring-loaded switch. If you pull it down, it goes to radio. If you press it up, it's interphone. Okay. You can either use this by pressing it up on interphone. Okay. Or, and I don't know how well I'm going to be able to show you this. There's a trigger on the forward part of the yoke here. And this trigger, if I push it forward, that's interphone. It's the same thing as that switch down on the bottom. If I pull it back, that's radio. Okay, so push it forward. I could do the same thing with the test by pushing it forward and holding it while I do the test. I want to hear that loud oxygen sound on the speaker. So I'm going to be doing this. You won't be able to see it because I have to hold the phone while I'm doing this, but that's what I'm going to be doing behind the yoke. Okay? All right, see if I can do this and hold the phone at the same time. This is interesting. Come on. There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do to test the oxygen, one finger, we want to make sure that first the oxygen mask, the down at 100% is selected. If it was up, it looks like that. It's kind of hard to see here, but you want to push that switch down, so it should say on at 100%, just like it does now. Okay, I'm going to take one finger, my thumb, put it on the emergency test, and another finger here on the oxygen test, which I'll show you in a second. And I'm going to look for this window right here that has a little cat's eye that's going to show up when I test the oxygen. So I'm going to push forward and then push down. Okay, you heard that loud hissing sound? That was the proper test that we were looking for. And now I'm going to move it and do it a little closer so you can see that cat's eye show up here. Again, that's the down at 100%. If it was up, it looks like that. We want it down. Okay, one thumb here, one finger here, and I'm looking here. You see that little cat's eye that shows up? That's what we're looking for. Okay. Now that I've completed the oxygen test, I'm going to go back here and I'm going to check my line pressure to make sure that it didn't bleed off. So I'm going to go ahead and pull down, and I've got a steady line pressure, so that's good. That's a successful test for the oxygen system. For the FO side, the captain would do the same thing on his side. All right. Now we're over here to the EIS source selector. This is our DE, or display electronic units. We have 3 of them, 1 for the captain, 2 for the FO, and the standby is the OGS. The captain checks the OGS. The FO just makes sure that we're selected to number 2. Okay. I want to make sure that all these lights are dark. For instance, this would be an abnormal situation. That would be an abnormal situation. Okay, we want these to be completely dark. And your instructor will explain what the purpose of these switches, but basically it takes the information that would be displayed on the captain's side, and if the FO's information failed, it would allow me to display the captain's information on the FO side by pressing one of these switches, whichever one had failed. Okay, just want to make sure the normal position will be dark. We check the static air source selector, make sure that it's in the normal position. And then as we come across our screens, we want to check to make sure that we don't have any amber X's or any information that's missing or corrupted. We're going to check the clock here, make sure that our time is accurate. If you have a GPS airplane, then you can verify the clock time by going to Reference, Dock Data, And you'll notice here that right now it says clock, but if you wait a few seconds, it'll say GNS, which will be the GNS information, the GNS time. Okay, if you don't have an airplane that has a GNS, then you can use, if you refer to the, I think it's chapter 15 in the FOM, which talks about the approved methods for checking the clock. One of them would be the WWV on the HF frequencies, plugging it in and listening for the time that way. Okay, but we want to make sure that that's accurate, especially when we have North Atlantic crossings. It's required, and it's on the checklist. So need to know how to do that. All right, coming across, the next thing we're going to do is check the primary and secondary gear indications. To do that, we're going to go to the config page, which is this one here. Select config. All right, and that displays the config page for us. You'll notice that this is my primary gear indication, and it's kind of hard to see, but these are green dots. Those are our secondary gear indication. So if something had burned out up here, we could also check it here as well. So we're going to pull out to make sure they all turn red on us. Okay, and they do. I know it's kind of hard to tell because I'm using a flashlight here, but these ones also turned red. If I release, they should turn back to green, which they just did. That one turned back to green, and we're good. We'll go ahead and erect my standby if necessary, and well, it would be, but this one's already good to go. And then I would go ahead and set up my altimeter setting in my standby here. Coming down, the brake selector is off, and this kind of hard to see here. This is called an overboost bar. If I take a throttle all the way to the stop here, that's called max thrust. Okay, that would be max thrust. If I take it through that bar, there we go. That's called firewall thrust. So you see how it actually, it's kind of hard to see, but it actually pushed that bar down forward, which gives us additional power. That's firewall thrust. With the bar up, it's just max thrust. Okay, so you're checking to make sure that that bar is in the up position. If it wasn't, you might want to talk to maintenance and find out why not. Okay. After that, we're going to check each one of the throttles here, and we're not really listening for the audio so much as we are for the motion. We want to make sure that it's unrestricted. So we're going to take 1 all the way forward to the bar, bring it all the way back. We're going to take 2 and 3 all the way to the bar and bring it back. And you might be asking yourself, well, why not check them each individually? Well, the reason for it is this one here doesn't cause the takeoff warning. So if I push it forward, nothing. So no point in checking it separately. Okay. All right. Coming down after that, I want to go to my Q switches. Hang on, I'm hung up on one of my cord is hung up here. Okay, I'm going to go to these Q switches, and I'm going to check each one of these in a horseshoe shape. So I'm going to start engine, hydraulics, electric, air, fuel, config, miscellaneous status. So I'm just going to make a little horseshoe here and check every one of them in the parameters. I'm going to start with the engine page. On the engine page, I want to check and make sure that I have a good oil quantity on all the engines, because you're not going to get an alert if you don't have oil quantity on the engines until you go to start the engine. So that could save you some trouble and time, and it would keep us from having a delay later. So check your oil quantities, make sure everything looks good there. The next page I'm going to go to is the hydraulics. So go to hydraulics. On this page, I'm just looking for proper quantity. We need at least 4.75 in 1 and 2, and we need at least 6 and 3. Okay, so we're good on that. The next page would be the electrics page. On the electrics page, I'm just checking to make sure there's no faulted buses. All the buses are green. If they were faulted, they would be amber. I can also see that right now I'm using the APU as my primary source of power. I'm pulling a 0.14 load, and the APU is the primary source of power. So everything looks good on this one. Battery charge is good, and I'm moving on. Next one's going to be the air page. So select the air page. This is a good opportunity once you get to the air page to make sure that you remember to turn the APU air on, because if you didn't, the engines aren't going to start, and you're going to be sweating. So just make sure that the APU load valve's open, isolation valves are open, and we got packs supplying air and the temperatures where we want it. Really, that's all you can do there on the air page. The next page is the fuel page. On the fuel page, we're showing currently 81,000 pounds of fuel. All main tanks full. I don't have any amber X's anywhere. Everything looks good. All right, moving on to the next page is the config page, which is one we just looked at a second ago. On this one, you want to make sure that you have all the tires, all the pressures, all the temperatures, that no information is missing. There is a certain fault on the airplane that can cause some of the information not to be displayed on the config page. So you want to go through and make sure you check all that information is correct and it's present. While I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and show you the numbering for the tires, which is going to be tire 1, tire 2, tire 3, tire 4, tire 5, tire 6, tire 7, tire 8, tire 9, tire 10. Nose left, nose right. Okay, so that's the numbering for the tires on the MD-11. The inside number that's inside the tire, that's your tire pressure, and the little number here outside of it is your brake temperature. Okay, so make sure all that information is correct and displayed. All right. The next page is going to be the would be the miscellaneous. It's just another step on the way. It just makes it easier. There's really nothing to look at here. It makes it easier to be a horseshoe to remember. So status page is the last page you're going to end on, and there's the status page. The reason we end on the status page is because the status page is an overview of all the systems. So you can see all the information that's going on in any system. If there's a fault or a malfunction, you can see it on this page. Right now we're looking pretty good, so we're going to continue with our pre-flight. My next step, it would be to go ahead and set up my radios the way I want them. The number one radio we usually use for ATC. In other words, it's a I guess you could call it a dynamic frequency radio. For instance, ground, tower, departure, so forth and so on. And the second radio, radio number 2 over here, is always used for static. So ATIS, clearance, guard, those types of things will be on this radio. Okay, just makes things work a lot better. One of the things that's really important you want to make sure when you're dealing with the radios is that these heads, remember these are heads, okay? These aren't actually radios. This is not a radio 2, this is not radio 1. This is head 1 and head 2. I can control the radio from any head. So by selecting 1 here, I can now control radio 1 from head 2. All right. You don't want to do this because what will happen is if you're in here and you're talking to ATC like on departure, and you think you're tuning to get pass a departure message or something like that, you could wind up losing your active frequency that you're talking to ATC. So we never want to do that. You always want to leave these in 1, 2, and 3 on the third head. All right, and then just reach across and tune if you're using that radio or tune here. Okay, so that's what we want to do. Always 1, 2, and 3. These here are our mic selector switches. So if I want to talk on radio 1, I have to push radio 1 for mic. And then in order to hear, these little knobs down here have to be up in order for you to hear, and it has to be turned to a reasonable volume. Okay, so I can listen to radio 1 while I'm talking on it. I can listen to radio 2 even though I'm not talking on it. I can listen to radio 3 or the HF. I'm sorry, that blue cord keeps getting in the way. HF1 or HF2, and the interphone. I can listen to all these things without having to be selected on. I'm talking on one. I'm listening on all of them at the moment, which I don't want. So I'm going to push them down to get rid of them. And I'm just going to leave number 1 up for now. I don't need the ident light on. This is where I was telling you before you could test these. These also don't get tested with the annunciator light test. All right. So that's how that works. Also, the mics in the top don't get tested as well. So 1, 2, 3. Set up your radios. Maybe ground. Let's see. I think ground's 2165. All right. This is a transfer switch. So I moved 2165 to the active, and then the tower's 33.9, I think. So I'm just going to go ahead and set that up. So there's tower, and then I could put in ATIS over here. That's ATIS, and then clearance would be 2035, I think. Like that. So now my active frequencies clearance, and my standby here frequency is ATIS. Okay? So my radios are set up. I'm happy with that. The next thing I'm going to do is test my radar. So my radar over here, before I test it, I want to make sure that it's not in WX. See, this switch here turns WX, turbulence, map. I don't want to be in any of those. All I want to be in is test. Okay, that way when I flip this switch, I don't irradiate anybody on the ground in front of the airplane. Okay, so we're in test. And before I can test, again, remember we had to change these from weather to terrain so that we could test the terrain. Well, now we've got to change them back to weather so we can test the weather. Okay, so right now it shows terrain. I'm going to change it to weather by pushing this little button here, and watch what happens. Now it says WXR off. That's what I want. The key here is WXR, okay, because the radar's off because we're not using it, but we want to be able to see the weather radar screen, and also we want to make sure that it's full bright, and we want to do this on both the FO and the captain's side. Okay, that's what we're looking for. So now We're going to come down here to the pedestal, and I'm going to go ahead and select number 1, and I'm going to look for my test patterns. And there's my test pattern. That's a successful test. And then I'm going to move it back to the center position, and then I'm going to select number 2, and I'm going to test radar number 2. Okay, good. That's a good test. So I'm going to go ahead and move it back to the off position, which is the center position, and it's off. Now the next thing I'm going to do, and this should be not 7600. Hang on. There we go. Next thing I'm going to do is test my TCAS. To do that, in this particular model, the TCAS function, I don't know if you can see it or not, but is all the way over here to the left. See where it says test? So I'm going to take this knob and turn it and hold it all the way to the left, and I'm going to look at my screens, and I want to see those little 4 targets, and also I'm looking on the vertical speed on the right, which just disappeared. Hang on a second. Right over here. So I'm checking that vertical speed tape to make sure that it's showing, and then the 4 targets, and then the oral TCAS pass means we've got a good test. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is come down and check my rudder and aileron trim. They should be both 0. Okay, and they are. I'm going to check my ADG handle, make sure that it's down and safety, and then the ship's papers. And that's it for the cockpit setup for the FO. I'm going to show you the FMS entry procedure and the captain's cockpit setup from the left seat in just a moment. Okay, here we are now in the left seat, in the captain's seat here, and the captain's pre-flight is going to begin on the glare shield panel here. It's going to work the same way. We want to make sure that we're set to QNH. We are. We want to be in RA for takeoff. Again, traffic, data, NDB1, NDB2, check to make sure no amber X's, VR1, VR2, and that's the way we want it. Again, you want to make sure that you're showing magnetic here. I forgot to mention this on the FO's cockpit, but see where it says magnetic here? You want to make sure that says magnetic, because it could be true by selecting this. If you look down here, you see it goes from true to magnetic when I push that button. You want to be in magnetic. I forgot to mention that on the FO side, but that's something you definitely want to check. Okay, and then as a good captain, you could go through and just make sure your FO set everything up correctly and that it's the way you want it. Then we're going to move down here to the oxygen test. Good, same as the first officer. We're going to make sure that the oxygen dilution rate is down at 100%. And we would set up our radios again and press these two to test, and we would look for the sound on the overhead as well. Again, and then here, remember I told you the captain checks the aux DEU. So to do that, you just take the switch, move it to the aux position. The screens flicker for a moment while they go to the aux DEU. And a good test would be information just like you see here. If you saw 3 red X's, that would be an indication of a DEU failure, and that would be notify maintenance. So I'm going to switch it back to normal. Okay, coming up, checking my static sources in normal. Same thing with the screens, no amber X's, no missing information. Everything looks good. Now the book says that this is where you enter the FMS data. I would just go ahead and finish your pre-flight and then come back to the FMS setup so that you don't miss anything. So I would just go ahead and come down, check my radios, make sure they're set up the way I want them, make sure I'm listening on what I need. I should be here on interphone while I'm talking to the ground guy. That should be up. Okay, that's good. Everything else is normal. All right, now we can start our FMS entry procedure. Okay, so same thing with the captain. Captain starts on the same page, aircraft status. He could double check, but we did that already when we came in. So the next page for the captain is the flight plan init. And I've got my flight plan here in front of me, which I'm just going to lay down so you can kind of see it as I go through. The boxes, I need to complete this page before I can move on. This is the first step. So you got to fill in all these boxes. You can't have any empty boxes. So our flight number, let's start there. If we look at our flight plan here, our flight number is, it's hiding from me, right here, WGN 1000, right here, that's where your flight number is, okay? So we're going to go ahead and enter WGN 1000, WGN 123. Go ahead and put that on the flight number by lateral L4. Takes it. Now you can't have, on some of these you can't have a 3-digit number, so it couldn't be WGN 701, it'd have to be WGN 0701. Just be aware of that. The next box is asking for cruise altitude. So I'm going to go down here to my flight plan here and find my initial level here. Initial flight level 350. So I'm going to go ahead and enter 350. Put that in the cruise. Alright, now you see right here where it says temperature and winds. This temperature is giving me the ISA, or standard temperature, for 35,000 feet. But we need to correct for non-standard temperature. So to do that, we're going to go back to our flight plan here. And I'm going to find my top of climb here, my initial level. If I go to the second page, oh, I think it's on the back here. Alright, so where's my top of climb here? TOC, top of climb, right here. So you can see here, we're climbing. This is TDV, temperature deviation. Climb, 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 climb. And, oh, I'm sorry, here it is, 350. Climb, 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 and right here. So climb here, the next one's +4. So that's our correction for flight level 350 would be +4. So right now it says -54, so just doing some simple math here, we know that that's going to be -50. So we type -50 slash, now we're going to go back to the front of the flight plan and find our average wind component here. Sorry. Okay, our average wind component is +14. See that? Average WC. So I'm going to come back here to the box, and I'm going to type +14. So we're +14. And I'm going to lateral line 6. And there it goes, -50, tail 1 of 14. So that's it for that one. Now the next step is the CI, or cost index. This determines how fast the airplane flies and how fuel efficient it is. And the company's decided what they want by on the flight plan checking right here. See where it says CI 080? So we're going to put our cost index at 80. 80. And there we go. And now we're done with this page. So once we finish with this page, it gets easy. That was the hardest part. Now it's going to be easy. All we have to do is go to flight plan. We're going to always start here after we finish with that. And we're just going to go across every page. We're going to complete every page until we wind up on the page we take off on. Okay, so we're going to start on flight plan. And it says Los Angeles. Well, we have to look and see what our routing is. Let's find our routing. So if we look at the bottom of our flight plan, there's our route. And we'll just assume for today's purposes that our route is our clearance. We're cleared via Loop 7, Daggett, Direct, DRK, J6, Little Rock, J66, Romeo, Mike, Golf, Col T1, Atlanta. Okay, so that is our route. We're going to put it in just like that. One thing you might notice is you're putting stuff in, like it may say Loop 7 here, but because these are older flight plans and the database keeps getting updated with more current information, it may not be Loop 7 in the box. It might be Loop 9 by the time you get into training, or 10 or whatever. But that's okay. Just go ahead and select whatever the next number it is. That's what we want to do. Okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and enter the Loop 7 Daggett. That's our departure and transition. So to do that, once we're on the flight plan page, you're going to select the top, which is Los Angeles. Then you're going to select SID. And then we're going to first choose the runway. Today we're using 24 left. By doing that, selecting the runway first, we show all the applicable departures that apply to that runway. They come up first, so we don't have to scroll through a bunch of stuff that we don't need to look at. And we're looking for the loop departure. And there it is. And you can, just like I told you, see it says Loop 8 and our paperwork says Loop 7. So we're just going to go ahead and select Loop 8. Our transition is Daggett. Remember, if we look back at our flight plan here, there's Daggett. So we're going to choose Daggett. And once I have the Loop 8 Daggett with the runway, I'm going to see where it says that little star insert. I'm going to select it. And as soon as I do that, boom, drops it right into our flight plan. Don't be alarmed by this where it says manual. This just means there's a heading that's associated with the departure. So for instance, we're going to take off, fly heading 251, and then we're going to fly that until they tell us to do something else. Okay, it's a radar vector departure to a transition. All right. And there's our crossing restrictions. Los Angeles at 10 or above, Kegs at 13 or above, Coop at 15 or above. You'd want to check that with your departure to make sure that those are correct. All right. So, all right. So the next step, what comes after Daggett? It says Daggett direct to DRK. So we're going to find Daggett. There's Daggett, and we're going to put DRK right below it. DRK. Whoops, sorry. Yeah, you got to watch what you're typing with this box. Sometimes you can double type. DRK. And there's DRK. All right. One other thing to notice. this is like a piece of paper. It moves up and down. So if you want the paper to move in this direction, you need to push it in that direction. So you're pushing it in the direction you want it to move. If you want it to move down, then you push it in the direction you want it to move. Okay, that can be a little confusing for new guys. So from DRK, we have an airway. So I'm going to look and see what my airway is. DRK J6 Little Rock J66 Romeo Mike Golf. This makes it a lot easier for us. So what you're going to do is go to DRK, vertical revise, see where it says airways. I'm going to select airways, and we're going to put in J6. J6. Okay. Now, you could go ahead and put the transition point, which is Little Rock, if you wanted to work a little harder, or you could just put the next airway, which in this case, if we look at our flight plan here, J6 Little Rock J66. I'm just going to put in J66 on the left-hand side and see if it gives me Little Rock. That might save you a little time. J66. Check the transition points, Little Rock, it is. And then I need to find the end point, J66 Romeo Mike Golf. So I'm going to put in Romeo Mike Golf, Romeo Mike Golf. Not in database. Oh, you see what I mean about watching how you type? Romeo Mike Golf. There we go. And once I'm happy with that, I'm going to hit insert. Okay. And now I can push up my flight plan here to get to the bottom. Now I kind of went the long way. One way that you can always go back to the top of your flight plan is by pressing the flight plan button. That takes me back to the top. And if I wanted to go to the end of the flight plan, the easiest thing to do would be to push this down and just go right to the end. See, there's Romeo Mike Golf, so it saved me a little time. Okay, so from Romeo Mike Golf, it looks like we're filed for the Colte 1 arrival into Atlanta. So let's go ahead and select Romeo Mike Golf, select star, and Colte 1 right there. My transition's going to be, not sure why it's selected Memphis. You know, maybe that's, hang on, let me try that again. Maybe I accidentally pushed something here. Colte 1. Yeah, okay. All right. Let me just check something in the flight plan before I commit to... No, okay, that's why. It is Memphis. Okay, Memphis. And the reason I know that is if I look in my flight plan here, it didn't have it here, but if you look down your flight plan, there's Memphis. So it's part of the arrival. So I'm going to go Colte 1 Memphis, and then I'm going to leave the runway blank because we don't know yet. It's 3 hours from now before we're going to get there, so we don't know what runway we're going to use. So I'm just going to go ahead and insert, and there you go. Romeo Mike Golf, Erlin, Colte, Atlanta. And you could drop the flight plan discount if you wanted to out of it here. And there we go. So that's the entire flight plan entered via the flight plan that we have here. And we would go ahead and check this with the RFO. To do that, you can check the individual leg distances. Notice right now I'm displaying ETE, or estimated time en route. If I go to the page button, I'm on page 2 of 2, and now I'm displaying distances. So distance between Los Angeles and Kegs is 8. The distance between Kegs and Coop is 12, and so forth and so on. Just go through the entire flight plan, just check the distances, and you're good to go. On an oceanic flight, you're going to make sure that you check it with the third MCDU, which we're going to do here in a second, and you'll be able to see. But for a standard flight, you can do it with that. All right, next thing we're going to look at here, remember I told you we start here, we move across, and then start here and move across. So that's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to move straight across. So flight plan, we did progress. I want to look for my total distance, or 1,723 miles. If I check it against my flight plan, distance 1,718 miles, it's pretty close. So we're good there. One thing to know that if your IRUs are not aligned by this point, you won't have that distance yet. So don't be alarmed if you get to this point in the setup and you don't have the distance yet. It's just because the IRUs aren't aligned yet. Coincidentally, I don't know if I mentioned it or not before, but the radars also need the IRUs to be aligned before you can test as well. Okay. All right, fixed page, nothing on this fixed page. If we had an engine turn procedure, it would be displayed on our toll card. Today we don't have one, so we're going to leave it blank. If you did, you could use the fixed page to kind of draw out a representation of what the engine turn. All right. Well, sorry about that. I hit the hour mark and it quit recording on me. Anyway, but like I was saying before, it sort of rudely interrupted. We were on the fixed page. This is where you would do if you had a engine turn procedure, but we don't have one today, so we're going to move on. So again, we're moving across to each one. Next thing, secondary flight plan. And before we hit copy up here, we're going to go to MCDU number 3, which is down here on the pedestal. All right. Anytime you're on this one here, it's going to be a MESS. Remember that acronym, MESS. Menu, exit, secondary copy, standby flight plan. All right. So I'm just going to put this, and I'm going to put it in a way so you can't see it. This is the way it would look before you copied that secondary, but I'm going to mess it up a little bit just so you can see what I mean. Okay, so I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. Just ignore what I'm doing right now. This is just to make it look messy so you could fix it no matter what page it's on. Okay, so let's say you came to it and it looked like this. Well, as long as you remember that acronym that I told you, the MESS, menu, exit, secondary copy, standby, you'll be fine. You can always get back to where you need to be. So let's start. Menu, exit. Remember, that's what we want to look at right here. We want it to be exited. Then we come up here, secondary copy. There's our secondary flight plan. Come back down here, standby flight plan, and boom, there you go. Now remember earlier I was mentioning we always check the oceanic flight plans with MCDU number 3, and I'm sure by now you're starting to realize why that is, because we have the latitude and longitudes here, and we can quickly scroll through them and check them easily. Okay, so we use this one for oceanics for checking the flight plan. So that's done. The next page is reference. There's nothing to do on that one. It just happens to be in line, so we hit it on the way. Engine out. We clear the engine out. The reason for clearing the engine out is if somebody had accidentally hit confirm engine out, you could possibly take off with engine out data. We don't want that. So we clear the engine out. Direct intercept, there's nothing to do there. Navrad page. The Navrad page, if you had anything on your screen here that you wanted to verify, for instance, I wanted to check that Santa Monica 160 was actually where it's supposed to be on the 160 radio, I could go ahead and type SMO/160. We always use the identifier as long as we have a database. If we have a database, you use the identifier. If you don't have a database, you use the frequency. But today we have a database, so I'm going to use SMO/160, just how it is up here. See, SMO/160. The VOR1, VOR2. Okay, so I'm going to put it on VOR1, and once I do that, it's going to paint for me a dashed magenta line here, and you can see that, yep, that fixes right where it's supposed to be. So you could either leave that in there or you could take it out. My preference is to have it decluttered, so I'm going to take it out. All right. If you put something in one of these VORs, we call that hard tuning. If you manually do it. If the box does it, then it's auto tune. But if you put it in, you hard tune it. And anytime you hard tune something, either be VOR, ILS, NDB, whatever, it has to be cleared out manually before it can auto tune. And that's important because the VORs are part of the FMS updating for position. So it triangulates your position using ground-based navigation, VOR, VOR, DME, 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 so forth and so on. And it can't do that if you've got it hard tuned. Okay, so make sure those are clear. Another thing I like to do is select a return runway. So I'd look at my book and I'd find the longest runway in case we took off and had a fire and had to come back immediately, and find the identifier for the ILS to the longest runway, and we're going to put that in. So it's 25 right ICFN / the inbound course 251, and I'm going to put that here. Actually 25 right would go over here, left would be over here, right over here. 25 right ICFN 251. Now note, this is the only place in the box that allows you to copy. So if you go ahead and select this, notice that it'll copy. That's the only place in the box that does that. All right, is this pre-select. So that all I have to do is copy and paste, and now I can fly an approach. Okay, so that's why it does that. All right, now I'm going to clear that out because I don't want that like that. This is the way we want it. We want it in the pre-select. Unless you immediate return, then you would copy and paste it. But we're going to leave it like this because the box will auto-tune for us the frequency once we select it with the FMS. Okay, so that's it for the Navrad page. Performance page. Nothing really to check on this page. You could maybe look at your optimal or max levels, but they're not in here yet. Init. We did this page already, so we're going to go to page 2. Notice we page 1 of 3, so we're going to go to page 2. Now 2. So now once you get to this page, the captain's going to read the numbers, and the first officer is going to put the numbers in the box. But since I'm here by myself, I'm going to do it by myself. So the captain would read, the FO puts in, all right, or the non-flying pilot. Sorry, the FO, that's correct. Taxi, we would look at our flight plan here. And the taxi fuel is 2,000, so I'm going to put 2.0. Route reserve, this is domestic flight, so I don't need a route reserve, so I'm going to /0 that. My final time, we know domestic reserves are 45 minutes, so /45 for the final time here. It's right now it's defaulted at 30. Okay, there's 45. If this was an international flight plan, your route reserve would be 10 minutes. I'm sorry, excuse me, not 10 minutes, 10%. And then your final time would be 30. Okay. Usable fuel on board, we're going to go ahead and look and see what our required is. Let's see, total fuel right here. 81, 187. If I go to the fuel synoptic here, I'm showing 80,800. If I go down here, I'm showing 80,800. I can just take this fuel across by selecting this button here. And it's going to take it across just like that. Okay. Now I'm going to skip the takeoff weight and go to the zero fuel weight. Now for the zero fuel weight, I'm going to pull out my weight and balance here. And on my weight and balance here at the very top, or not the very top, but zero fuel weight actual 405.7. Okay, 405.7. And I'm going to put that on the zero fuel weight line right here. Now once the airplane knows its fuel and it knows its zero fuel weight, it can calculate what the takeoff weight is going to be. And in this case it says 484.5. Alright, so I'm going to come back down here to my takeoff weight on my weight and balance, and I'm going to verify that it's within 1,000 pounds. 484.9. It is. It's within 1,000 pounds. So we're good. Alright, the next thing I need to know is we're going to skip to the very bottom, my zero fuel weight CG. So let's take a look. If I go to my weight and balance here, look for zero fuel weight right here, max zero fuel weight, 22.8. So I'm going to go ahead and enter 22.8. 0.8 max zero fuel, or zero fuel weight right here. Now once the airplane knows that, it's going to calculate what it thinks the takeoff weight is going to be. Alright, so if we look on, you can either find it on the fuel page or on the engine page at the top there. See where it says 25.5 here at the very top, and if I go back to the fuel page, you can see it right here, 25.5. Alright, now we're going to look and make sure that we need to be within 1 unit of what the paperwork says. And takeoff is 25.3. Alright, so the paperwork says 25.3. The airplane says 25.5. We're going to use the airplane as long as it's within 1 unit. So I mean, it can be, if the paperwork says it can be 25.3, it can be 26.3, or it could be 24.3. It's got to be within 1 unit. Okay, we're going to use the airplane. 25.5, and there we go. Okay, next page, because we're on page 3 of 3 now. Top left here is where you'd put your refuel quantity. So when you come out to the airplane, they say, hey, go ahead and throw in the refuel quantity of 82,000. That's what you would do before the fueler gets there. You'd put it up there, and then the fueler would be able to just fuel in auto, and the airplane would put the fuel wherever it needs to go. But since we've already got our fuel, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. And you don't want to see this ballast fuel. I want to tell you that having no ballast fuel is not the same thing as having zero ballast fuel. See how it's asking for a tank position? That needs to be cleared out if you don't have ballast. If you have ballast, then you put whatever it says. But in this case, we don't have any, so we want it to be clear. Over on the right-hand side, it tells us what our dump to gross weight value is, 491.5. That's if we push the dump switch once, it's going to dump down to this value. We can edit that value. We can make it 481.5 if we wanted, just by changing it like that. Or we can go back to the default value by clearing it out. Okay. No dump time today because we're under our max gross weight for we're under the max landing weight. Right now our gross weight's showing 486.4, and our max landing weight's 491.5, so we're good there. We've got Jet A fuel, that's in Los Angeles. If we were in Bogota and they maybe gave us A1, you'd want to check the fuel ticket and make sure you had the right fuel selected. So if I had A1, I'd type A1. If I had JP4, I could type 4. Whoops, that's 5. 4. Okay, so forth and so on. If it's Jet A, you just type A. Notice it's changing the freezing temperature as well. So that's why you want to make sure you got the right fuel selected. And that's it for this page. The next page is your takeoff approach page. Okay, So I just realized that I forgot to complete a card for this exercise for a toll card. So we're just going to use one that I happen to find in my binder so that we can knock this out real quick. But I'll explain some of the differences as we go forth. We're going to start here in the bottom right-hand corner for the takeoff approach page where it says engine out acceleration right there. And if you look, I'm going to put the card here side by side so you can see engine out acceleration in the bottom right corner, and then look at the parameters. They all match up as you go around. Kind of like an upside down horseshoe. If you start here and you go up to the left and then down on the speeds, it matches the box perfectly. Okay, so I'm going to put that right here. Hopefully it'll sit there. My engine out acceleration is 1128. And I'm going to go up here to my temperature. My temperature is 15C, and you have to put the C. It won't take it unless you put the C in there. There's 15C. Coincidentally, if you wanted to know what that was in Fahrenheit, all you have to do is push that button and it toggles the Fahrenheit. So, but we'll use it in Celsius. Okay, 15C. Slope and wind 0/0. 0/0. Runway 24 left in Los Angeles. And runway 24 left, Los Angeles. See how it just matches everything up? Flex is going to be 50. And then the next thing we check is the N1 setting, which our calculated N1 setting is 101.1, and we've got 102.8, 102.8. We want to be at or higher our calculated data, or else we can't go. Okay. The next thing is going to be the packs are off. Our flap setting is 28. Put that in there. Now, as the captain, as you're reading this, you say flaps 28. I want you to set it as well. We have a dial flap on this airplane over here on the right-hand side. Anything between a range of 10 to 25 degrees can be set with this little wheel just by rolling it down or rolling it up. Okay. So if it was anything like, 15.2 degrees, then I'd put it at 15.2 degrees. If it was 18 degrees, I'd put it at 18 degrees. Today, it says 28. So we actually have a gate here for 28. Okay, it has its own gate. So we don't use the dial flap today. But if you did, this is where you'd set it. Okay. But today we have a gate. And all that dial flap does is move this little, it's like a moving gate. And then when you set the flap handle into that gate, see that? It locks into that gate. Okay. So that's all that is. And then, but 28 has a gate. So, but we won't move these flaps until we get out to do our taxi procedure. So we're just making sure if 28 is the number, then you're just going to leave 15 set. That's the default. All right. So 15 set. So 28 flaps. The next thing we're going to check on our card here, it says after we do that, we need to check for a stab of 6.4. I've got 7.1. It's got to be within 1 unit. And it is. The reason why it's a little bit off today is because this card is for 512,000 pounds. And we're only 484 today. So the numbers aren't going to match up on this card, but I didn't have one to show you. I didn't have time to make one for you. So this is what we're looking for. It needs to be within 1 unit, 7.1, 6.4, it's within 1 unit, we're good. Next thing we do is check our speeds, V1, VR, and V2. These need to be within 3 knots. Obviously today they're not, and the reason why is because of the cards, but I'm not going to go flying, so it's not a big deal. But when you're checking them, these numbers need to be within 3 knots of these numbers. Okay, so you would you would read it out. The first officer would check it. Checks 135. As long as it's within 3 knots, checks 148. When you get to V2, you're looking for a couple of things, right? So as I'm splatting these numbers, you can see over here on the PFD, they're starting to show up here in their respective positions. Now, when I splat V2, I want you to notice that the autopilot box here is amber. Okay. Also, the auto throttles are amber. Notice that I don't have a pitch command from my flight director. And then the fourth thing would be the clock here. If you had a flight that just came in and landed and say it was 1 hour and 20 minutes and you picked it up from another crew, then that elapsed time would still say 1 hour and 20 minutes until we push this V2 splat, and then it zeroes it out. So when I splat the V2, well, splat means confirming. We'll see the little star. Splat means splat it like a bug. So we're going to confirm it. When that happens, you're going to see a speed here. The autopilot box is going to turn white. I'm going to get a pitch command. My clock is going to zero. Okay, I'm going to leave this pointed at this while I push the button here. And here it goes now. There's the white autopilot box. There's my pitch command. And my speed just showed up on V2 up here, and then my clock would have been 0. And you want to look for that every time. Okay, so that's something you definitely want to check for, because if The amber means it's not available. So if you didn't get that, you wouldn't have an autopilot when you took off. White means that the autopilot is off, but it's available. Coincidentally here, the amber auto throttles are still amber until the first engine start. Okay? All right, so now that's this page for the FMS setup is complete. And we'd be ready to go ahead and get a clearance, do a briefing, push back, and be on our way. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, just direct them to your instructor. Thanks. Bye.